why does everyone pretend that there's this thing, the Palestinians, as though they have a right to this place more than the Israelis have a right to it?
Yes.
I mean, why?
Well, I think it shows you the really malignant aspect of political correctness. The truth doesn't matter. The truth is what, for the people who subscribe to this ideology, truth is completely fungible.
But before we get into our conversation, my name's Eric Metaxas, and this channel exists to bring you a biblical perspective on today's news, culture, and hot-button issues. If you're new here or not, welcome, and be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you are notified when new videos get posted. In the April edition of the New Criterion, you write an article right in the front of the issue. And I thought, I've got to talk to you about it on my radio program because it's seminal information. It's a primer on what is Palestine, what is Gaza, what is Israel.
Yes.
And you start out by talking about the recent destruction of the portrait of Lord Balfour. So let's start there. I want my audience to understand this history. It is really important because it's very rarely talked about these days, and it's at the heart of everything that in this conflict. So please.
Yes. Well, probably most people in your audience will have heard of the Balfour Declaration. This was a 1917, I believe, declaration, very brief, just a paragraph or so, calling for a homeland for the Jewish people. This is World War I was beginning to wind down. It was clear the Allies were going to win. They were going to, the defeated Ottoman Empire, they were going to split it up in various ways. And this would be an opportunity to have a homeland for the Jewish people in that their ancient homeland, right? This is the spot where the Jews had been for millennia. The Kingdom of David going back, into 1000 BC.
So they're the original indigenous people.
They are the original indigenous people, yes. There never has been a state of Palestine, ever, never. And the people we call the Palestinians now they're Arabs. They're this group of Arabs who were expelled from Jordan, hundreds of thousands of them, and what they refer to as Black Tuesday, I believe. And no one wants them. Egypt doesn't want them. Jordan doesn't want them. Israel has agreed to the creation of the West Bank. That was originally part of Israel's territory. And then, from the moment that Israel was created, from that moment, they have been attacked by their neighbors. Remember, Israel is the only democracy in that part of the world. It's the only state that recognizes women's rights, that recognizes the rights of other minorities. And the fact that it's surrounded by many states which totally repudiate our liberal democratic inheritance of the West is something to bear in mind. So why is the Gaza Strip, why is that a secondary home for Palestinians? Well, that was after one of the wars that Israel was compelled to fight. That bit had been controlled by Egypt, but it was decided that this would be another place where Palestinians could live. In 2005, Israel withdrew all of its troops, all Jewish people out of that area at the behest of the Palestinians. They didn't want them. Okay, so they moved out. They created a wall, a border, and but ever since that time, they've just there's rockets been besieged in various ways. The billions and billions of your tax dollars that we have funneled to the Palestinians in that part of the world has gone to do what? Well, to create a tunnel network, to create an offensive means of attacking Israel, which is what happened on October 7th of last year when Hamas, an Iranian-funded Sunni Muslim terrorist organization, which, like Iran, their sole goal is, well, not their sole goal, but their approximate goal is to destroy Israel, wipe it off the face of the earth. Remember, that motto, from the river to the sea, is a genocidal slogan. I once asked some girls walking down the street, she was carrying a sign saying that. I said, well, what river is that? She said, well, the Euphrates? It's not the Euphrates, it's the Jordan River. And between Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea is what? Israel. So they want to obliterate Israel, and their founding document in 1988, I think, says the first thing we do is we get rid of Israel, and then we kill all the Jews. So and remember this, it is definitely a wild current of anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism isn't focused merely on the Jews. There's a reason that Hannah Arendt, in her great book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, began that book with a whole long section called anti-Semitism, because that is the fuel for an ideology that is essentially anti-Western.
Yeah.
And the chant, death to Israel, is regularly followed, invariably followed by death to America, which means death to the West.
Well, I want to go back, because in the article in the New Criterion in the April issue, you start, the inciting incident is the destruction of this portrait of Lord Balfour. So,
Yes.
so start there.
So, yes, this portrait hangs in, I believe, in Trinity College, Cambridge, hung, I should say, and a Hamas supporter, female, we could tell, but we couldn't see her face. It was filmed from behind by one of her colleagues, sprayed red paint of some sort on the portrait, big portrait, and then slashed it and destroyed it, essentially destroyed it. I'm not sure if some conservator can put it back together or not, but it looks like a case of Humpty Dumpty to me. But we'll see. But why? To dramatize the plight of the Palestinian people. Now, how did we have to have a ceasefire? They had a ceasefire until October 7th, 2023. What happened? Hamas invaded Israel, slaughtered 1,200 or more civilians.
There's no word that does justice, even slaughtered. Folks, raped, beheaded, mutilated. It is so sadistic and ghastly. It's demonic. That's
Yes.
the word. It's demonic.
It is demonic. Some people say medieval, but it's not medieval. It is demonic. And my friend Douglas Murray made a very good point. He's a Brit who's was reporting from Jerusalem. He said this, and from Gaza, this was, in a way, worse than what the Nazis did. Why? Because the Nazis at least knew they were doing evil. They felt guilty about it. You can tell all these, diary entries and so on. They knew this was the wrong thing to do. What does Hamas do? They slaughter a family, and the chap calls his mother and said, I just killed 12 Jews. It's unbelievable. But unfortunately, it's the way we live now. And I think of that line. I think of that line in Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises. One character asks another, how did you go bankrupt? He said, well, two ways. Gradually, then suddenly. And I think we're in this beautiful studio. We live in this very prosperous city, although it's beginning to show its wear and tear and cracks and so on. But we don't, I think, appreciate how fragile these achievements of civilization are. They take hundreds and hundreds, if not millennia, to build up. They can be torn down in a matter of a few months.
I want to come back to that. You wrote an article very recently in the Epoch Times
Yes.
About culture and about what you're touching on now. But before that, I just want to go back to this piece in the April issue of the New Criterion, where you're laying out the basics, the story. I mean, I don't know if you mentioned Theodore Herzl, but this idea that we're going to have a place where the Jews can go in 1917, the Balfour Declaration,
Yes.
of course, Lord Balfour, whose portrait was recently destroyed, desecrated. So this is this idea. And then we come to the so-called Palestinians. And I want to say it outright, and then you can give us the details. But the idea of Palestine and of the Palestinians is a wild fiction.
Yes, it is.
This is never said. It's rarely said. but it's a fact, and you write about it. Tell us more about that. In other words, this idea that there are these Palestinian people. I've heard this before, but you laid it out clearly.
Yeah, well, they're Arabs.
It's simply not true.
No,
There's no
it's
such
not
thing.
True. There's never, ever been a Palestinian state, ever. There have been Arabs. In a way, the Palestinians are the invention of the KGB. That may sound odd, but it's true.
No.
Yasser Arafat,
Yeah.
the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization head, a murderous thug. He had one of the ambassador to Sudan murdered. We now know he was a bad guy. The KGB understood that fomenting anti-Semitism had a collateral benefit. Namely, it also encouraged anti-Americanism. So Yasser Arafat was their puppet for decades, and it was because of him really that the current version of Palestinian unrest got its start. And remember, we do have to distinguish to a very large extent between the Palestinian people who are living in Gaza and the West Bank and Hamas, which is a murderous Sunni Muslim terrorist organization funded by Iran. On the other hand, it is also true, we know from footage from October 7th, that many of these Palestinian civilians who were working in Israel, they followed Hamas in, and unfortunately, not insignificant number of them participated in the slaughter. So it's a problem. It's a real problem.
It's extraordinary, but I just want to say again, this lie of, and again, you say it so clearly in the article, that the Palestinians, there is no such thing.
No,
it is invented. No. Why do you suppose people don't say that more often? Why does everyone pretend that there's this thing, the Palestinians, as though they have a right to this place more than the Israelis have a right to it?
Yes.
I mean, why?
Well, I think it shows you the really malignant aspect of political correctness. The truth doesn't matter. The truth is what, for the people who subscribe to this ideology, truth is completely fungible. It's not what actually happened. It's what serves your purpose as a political actor. In other words, it's the old doctrine of Thrasymachus from the Republic, from Plato's Republic, whose ideology was might makes right. Right? It's not. We don't care about the truth. We don't care about your rights. We don't care about discussion. If I have the power, I will impose my will upon you. And that's what they believe. And historical reality, historical truth is completely fungible to them.
Well, I mean, this is what we have to talk about. We're talking about a war on truth, a war on reality, a war on facts, a war on the biblical and Western ideals that have made America, that have made the West. It is a war on all those things.
Absolutely.
It's a war with humanity itself.
Absolutely.
It's the will to power. And I say it again, it's a satanic thing. It is a will to power that would crush anything that stands in its way.
Yes.
And that does crush anything that stands in its way.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right about that. And just think about the changes that have taken place in our culture over the last couple of decades. It wasn't so long ago that everybody, near enough, would have subscribed to the proposition in the book of Genesis that male and female created he, them, period, full stop, end of sentence, end of discussion. Now that is still, in fact, the case, but there are plenty of people for other political reasons who dispute it. Why? Because they understand that this is an avenue into an ideology that can destroy the culture.
You wrote an article in the Epoch Times. I always say Epoch Times, and then people say EPIC? No, EPOCH.
Right.
The Epoch Times, which is without any close competition, the best newspaper out there. But you talk about culture, and you were just touching on that. Let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah. Well, we ask, everybody's in favor of culture. They think that we should support it, it's important. But why? What are the lessons when we look back to our history? And I think T.S. Eliot was right when he said, he said two things. One is if you boil down Horace and the Elgin Marbles and St. Francis and Goethe, it's pretty thin soup. So culture by itself is not enough, but without culture, nothing else works. You need culture. We live in an amnesiac age. People no longer remember who they are, which means they no longer know who they are now. And it's part of the goal of the new criterion and our work at Encounter Books to try to remind people where we've been so that we know where we are now and how to deal with the problems we face going forward. So we're in a great battle against cultural amnesia. Now, what are these lessons of culture? Well, there are several. One was articulated well by Evelyn Waugh, whom I quote in that article, when he says, sometimes some ages are fat and happy and tranquil and unaffected by external enemies. Other ages are in a state of existential emergency. And the more complicated and sophisticated the culture, the more vulnerable they are and the more wary they must be. If our culture actually were to fall victim to the forces that are besieging it, both from without and maybe more importantly even from within, it would be a very sad day because we would see a lot more, as Waugh himself put it, a lot more than a few joint stock corporations bite the dust. It would be our entire way of life. And I think maybe the overriding lesson of culture is that, and I think I said this earlier in the program, is that civilizations take a long time, require immense labor to be formed, to build up. They are destroyed in an instant. Voltaire said that, going back to something we were talking about just a few minutes ago, Voltaire said that if you can get people to believe absurdities, you can very easily get them to commit atrocities. Just look around at what's happening on our college campuses today. Not just the quote-unquote pro-Palestinian stuff, but these expensive advanced camps for overaged kindergartners are repositories of absurdities and atrocities. I think that I wrote just in the current issue of the New Criterion a note about Victor Davis Hanson's new book, The End of Everything, and he talks there about 4 wars of annihilation: the Alexander the Great's destruction of Thebes in 335 BC, the destruction of Carthage at the end of the First Punic War in 146, the destruction of Constantinople in 1453, and the destruction of the seat of the Aztec Empire, whose name I would say, except I can't pronounce it, in 1521 by Cortez. And these wars of destruction, of annihilation, really more than destruction, of annihilation, are quite something. And Victor uses as an epigraph the sestet of Shelley's great poem Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land and so on. But the sestet goes as follows. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
I get just about get tears in my eyes. It's what an amazing thing. I mean, that's a famous poem, Ozymandias, folks, look it up. But the idea that something could be so thoroughly destroyed.
Yes. And as Victor says, the last thought of those who are about to be slaughtered is, it can't happen here.
When you talk about what Voltaire says, if you get people to believe absurdities,
yes.
That's where we are today, right? There I mean, and it's interesting because in Orwell's 1984...
I was just going to bring up Orwell, exactly. If you could get people to believe that 2 + 2
That's it.
equals 5,
I was just going to bring that up.
Everything else follows.
If you can get people, put a gun to their head and say, just repeat after me, Bruce Jenner is now a woman. Just say it. Just say it. Go ahead, say it. People say, oh, okay, I'll just say it. It's not true. It's not true, but just say it. What else? Anything. Borders are racist. Just say it. We all know it's not true, but say it. On and on and on it goes. America is a force for evil in the world. It is an evil colonialist empire. Just say it. Just go along. Just go along. If you believe those things, the Jews are vermin who must be exterminated. Go ahead. Say it. We'll give you a little bit of food. We'll put it in your mouth. We'll reward you if you say these things, if you go along with these lies. You go along with these lies, and you become complicit in paving the way for satanic evil, which my people, the Germans, did, and which many Americans today are doing. Just say, this was the most secure, fair election we have ever had in our history. Just say it. Don't think about it. Just say it. Say whatever we tell you to say. It is a bargain with the devil.
It's a belief in the absolutization of language, that if you say something, you can make it so. It's a kind of strange, surrealistic impulse.
We're living in such strange times, so it's valuable, Roger, to have you here to help us, think it through. And when you talk about, as you do in this article in the Epoch Times recently, about the glory of civilization. I mean, when I think, anybody who looks at architecture from, about 120 years ago, it's so amazing how far we've fallen from that.
Yes.
It takes decades and decades in a way
Yes.
to pave the way for the anarchy.
Well, one of maybe the most important art in some ways, from a civil point of view anyway, is architecture, because this is the physical embodiment of the spirit of a culture. Who was it who said that we form our buildings and then they form us? And if you look around at much of contemporary architecture, it's not only hideous, it's also anti-human.
See, that's the point, and we don't really have time to get into this, but that is really the point of it all. And I would argue anything that's anti-human, which much of the the globalist Great Reset folks, they're the enemies of
They're explicitly
human beings.
anti-human.
But
Explicitly.
why? Because as I said earlier, it's a satanic project, because their rage is against God, in whose image human beings are made. So to attack God, you attack the apple of his eye, you attack who is made in his image. And so that's to me the tell, the great tell.
Absolutely right. Yeah, their anti-humanism is theological in that sense.
Yeah.
Augustine says, the source of all evil is man's desire to replace God with himself. And so you have an existentialist like Sartre said, what's man's fundamental project? To be God.
Yeah.
And that's
and in fact, that's Lucifer's project.
Doesn't end well.
That's Satan's project, and it's religion without the God of the Bible.
Right.
I'm going to get to heaven on my own, thank you very much, and when I get there, I'll murder God and take his place.
Yes.
That's been the devil's plan all along. I actually write about this in my new book, Religionless Christianity. I'll give you a book before you leave if we have a copy here. But it is really at the heart of everything we're talking about. So this is very serious stuff. Grateful, Roger Kimball, to have you in the studio. Folks, go to newcriterion.com. You can check out all kinds of great stuff there, including the short article about Lord Balfour in the April issue. Roger Kimball, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.